and welcome. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran, and you're watching a special broadcast here on DD India. Over the next 30 minutes, I want to revisit the life and works of Vinayak Damodar Savarkar, popularly known as Veer Savarkar. Now, some believe that Savarkar did not get his due because of a selective reading or interpretation of Indian history in general and India's freedom struggle in particular. Now, they believe that Savarkar was more sinned against than sinning. Others see him in black and white terms as a polarizing and controversial figure. Now, history can be contentious, as Nigerian writer Chinua Achebe said, until the lions have their own historians, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. So there are two sides to every question. Right, joining me is Dr. Vikram Sampath, who has written a two-part biography of Savarkar. The first volume is titled Savarkar Echoes from a Forgotten Past, 1883 to 1924. It was published in 2019. And the second and last volume is titled Savarkar, A Contested Legacy, 1924 to 1966. It was published earlier this year. Now, Dr. Sampath needs no introduction, but just for the benefit of viewers tuning in from India and abroad, Vikram Sampath lives in Bengaluru. He did his bachelor's in engineering in electronics from Birla Institute of Technology and Science, Pilani in Rajasthan, and Masters in Mathematics from the same institution. He completed his MBA in Finance from SP Jain Institute of Management and Research, Mumbai. He worked in the corporate world at GE Money, Citibank, and an IT company in Bengaluru. He has a doctorate in History and Music from the University of Queensland, Australia. He is a Fellow of the Royal Historical Society, London, and a former Senior Fellow at the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, New Delhi. Among his other published works are Women of the Records, published in 2021, Voice of the Veena, S. Balachandar, a biography, published in 2012, My Name is Gauhar Jan, The Life and Times of a Musician, published in 2010, and Splendors of Royal Mysore, The Untold Story of the Vodeyars, published in 2008. Dr. Sampath is also credited with establishing an archive of Indian music, India's first digital sound archive for vintage recordings. And he is the first Yuva Puraskar awardee from the Sahitya Academy in the year 2012. Dr. Sampath, welcome to DD India. Dr. Sampath, there have been many controversial figures in Indian history, and books have been written about them too. Jinnah, for instance. Now, what is noteworthy though is that even in the case of Jinnah, the very people who despised him revisited his legacy. I am talking about L.K. Advani and Jaswant Singh, the late Jaswant Singh, both from the BJP. Advani visited Pakistan and came back with a different perspective of Jinnah. Jaswant Singh wrote a book on Jinnah, which cost him his place in the party. But here are two men who cared to or dared to look at Jinnah. But in the case of Savarkar, one finds that politicians or academics from neither the Marxist fold nor the Indian National Congress Party cared to revisit Savarkar. Now, what does that tell you about them and Savarkar?
Thank you so much for inviting me to the show, and that's a fabulous way to start off. I think that's the bane of Indian historiography, particularly the freedom movement, and also after that, where several people in the quest to make this freedom struggle a very, very monochromatic kind of a narrative of the entire struggle. Many people have been excised out of that larger narrative of what constituted the struggle for the liberation of India. And today, after 75 years, when we are celebrating the Amrit Mahotsav, I think the time has come when we revisit these stories. And I think primal in that is Swatantra Veer Savarkar, because of the fact that for the longest time, he's been calumniated so much, and there's so much of invectives and allegations that are hurled against him, even by people who have hardly read much about him. It's all based on insinuations and out of political considerations, and that is what I have a problem with as a historian. You may love someone as much as you want, you may hate someone as much as you want, but let that be informed, your opinion about that person. But for the longest time, Savarkar had become such a persona non grata in political circles, in public discourse, and but of course academic circles, which have been under the thraldom of the what I term as the leftist historiographic hegemony, that anybody who even wrote about Savarkar or said something about him would have to pay a very heavy price with their careers, with their livelihood, and so on. So today, at least, we are able to have this kind of a mainstream discussion. A mainstream publisher in India has the courage to publish my books, which itself is a huge indication of the times that we've come forward in time in the independent history of India.
Dr. Sampath, you posted a long thread on Twitter recently. In it, you cite the classes 6, 7, and 8 textbooks prescribed by the National Council of Educational Research and Training, NCERT, to say that the southern dynasties, such as the Cholas, were dismissed in a few sentences. Now, I looked up the NCERT history textbooks of classes 9, 10, 11, and 12, and this is what I found. For instance, in class 12, Themes in Indian History, Part 3, I searched for the word Savarkar. Nothing came up. Zilch. Also, there were a few passing references to the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh and the Hindu Mahasabha. Now, would you agree, Dr. Sampath, that just like the phrase Lutyens media, there is also a Lutyens history which cannot see beyond Delhi?
Very true. I think that was bang on, that there are so many problems with the way at least our textbooks are written, and that's sometimes the first and probably the last brush that many an Indian young person has with the story of his or her country, because very few people opt for history as a subject beyond these classes. Sometimes you drop it at class 10, maximum class 12. So in that limited time, 4 or 5 years, how is the story of your own country told to you? It's almost, there's no sense of ownership that it's your own nation's story being told to you, but it's almost told to you like you're sitting in a third person and looking at some other country. While, you don't need to have all this jingoistic, pride and all that about your nation, but genuine, underplaying of genuine civilizational greatness of India in different fields, whether it's philosophy or science or grammar, medicine, literature, alchemy, art, architecture. Not to say that everything about India was in ancient times was glorious and all that, but even the basic, things about our country is somewhere not presented in the way it needs to be. I think we very, very, very assiduously and faithfully memorize Shakespeare or Yeats and all of that, but then our kids do not learn Kalidasa or Tiruvalluvar or Annamacharya or Shankar Dev in Assam, either in the original or in translated works. So this disconnect from our own roots, I think that's so spectacular, and I don't think it has a parallel in any other country of the world. And the story of India too is told as a story of her invaders. Disproportionate amount of importance given to the dynasties and so on, which were invaders of India and largely Delhi-centric, Lodhis and Khiljis and Tughlaqs, whose contribution per se to the nation or our civilization was probably minimal, but large swathes of India remain unrepresented. Like I mentioned in that thread to the Chola Empire, which even extended up to Southeast Asia, and we have some of the greatest Hindu temples in those countries. Even to this day, like the Angkor Wat in Cambodia. So these civilizational influences of India, or the Shatavahanas, the Rashtrakutas, the Ahoms of Assam, or the Twipras in Tripura, and all of these dynasties. I think when you say the story of India, it has to be a sum total of all its parts. I was so shocked when I was seeing these textbooks of NCERT that even someone like Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj is dismissed off in less than 1/4 of a page with just one little photograph and a little note around that. So if this is what a young person is going to read about her country, how do we also ensure that they have any kind of ownership or pride towards your own nation? So a thin line exists. History as a tool for nation building is often quoted as the utility of history, but then the thin line exists between genuine pride for the genuine achievements of your past and jingoism. So simultaneously, I think a lot of darker episodes of Indian history, Islamic invasions of medieval India, all these are very conveniently airbrushed because we think that saying that would somehow, or talking the truth would somehow offend people today, and this would lead to disharmony, social disharmony in contemporary times, which I think is very, very untrue and also unfair to communities today who have nothing to do with the invasions of Ghazni and Ghori and Tipu Sultan and Aurangzeb and their barbarities and all of that. So I think we have not made that peace with our past. We have not healed those wounds of the past. And our textbooks, which are the first manifestation of our introduction to the story of our own country, stands testimony to these very fault lines that lie, according to me, in the way Indian historiography stands today.
Now that gives me a perfect segue into my next question. A newspaper report quoted the National Book Trust chairperson Govind Prasad Sharma. Sharma is quoted as saying that the existing curriculum dwells too much on quote-unquote defeats or invasions or foreign invaders, as you put it. Now, my question to you is this: is a revision of the textbook curriculum an idea whose time has come, that there is an urgent need to educate future generations about the history of southern India, or the northeast for that matter, that students must get a holistic perspective, not a cherry-picked version of history?
Very true. Very true. I would fully concur with Mr. Sharma. And so there again, as I said, a thin line between jingoism and genuine pride, where we talk of, so the history of India seems like a laundry list of so many battles that we have been losing, right? From the Arabs to the Turks to Mongols to, of course, the European powers, the British, Portuguese, French. We were just this Sone ki chidiya where everybody just kept coming, invading us, looting us, and we just kept getting defeated. The very fact that we are today alive and around as probably one of the world's oldest living civilizations shows that there must have been some amount of resistance and that we put, and some battles that we won also. So these also need to come into the mindsets of children as they read our books, that we are not a land of losers. Our traditions, our culture, our languages, our faiths have survived the onslaught of millennia, and that needs to be celebrated and talked about. And so many heroes and heroines of, in fact, I'm writing another book shortly, which would cover all these unsung heroes and heroines of India, from Lalitaditya Muktapida in Kashmir, who drove the Arabs out of India. They were never able to conquer anything beyond the conquest of Sindh, but then he doesn't feature in our books. As also a lady from Gujarat, Rani Naiki Devi, a woman regent queen who actually defeated Muhammad Ghori. So much that Ghori never had the courage to turn back at Gujarat in a very, very long time. In the south, from the state I come from, Karnataka, you had someone like Rani Abbakka of Ullal, who defeated the Portuguese. And in neighboring Kerala, there was Marthanda Varma, who totally devastated the Dutch East India Company. The Dutch, actually globally, their their prominence came down after this particular defeat. And these are people we should celebrate. Velu Nachiyar in Tamil Nadu, who was the first woman to fight against the British imperialism, or a Lachit Borphukan in Assam, who ensured that the Mughals never managed to capture the Kamrup. Suhail Dev, all these people, there's a very rich source of heroes and heroines like Rana Kumbha and so many others who we don't even know or talk much about. So it needs to be this holistic approach. And I totally agree with Mr. Sharma. Even an empire like the Vijayanagar Empire, which, is ostensibly one of the greatest empires in the subcontinent, and the prosperity that it brought to the people and to the capital of Hampi. Astonishingly, in the CBSE, this NCRT book, class 7 book, it is just half a page of reference to them, whereas there is an entire chapter dedicated to the Delhi Sultanate and one and more chapters on the Mughals. So nobody needs to be excised. It's not my case that someone needs to be undermined or whatever. But when you say the story of India, it's the sum of the parts. And I think all these parts need to be represented, even for the sake of national integration and that sense that we all belong to this common nation and civilization.
Dr. Sampath, I want you to demystify certain things for our viewers. Now, how did Savarkar define Hindutva? What was its meaning as he thought it? Also, is it true that Savarkar had a rather testy relationship with the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, or the RSS, that he was sympathetic to their cause but never really took up their membership?
Sure. So in the jail in Kalapani was where he saw the manner in which some of the Muslim Jamadars, the atrocities that they were using against the Hindu prisoners, and also easily getting them converted so that they could escape the punishments and all of that. And also at that time, the whole caliphate movement, which is normally called the Khilafat agitation in India, that Mahatma Gandhi had launched to ensure that the caliphate is re-established in Turkey after the First World War. That was dangerously mobilizing people on communal lines. And the failure of the caliphate movement had very disastrous consequences for India, particularly the Hindus. You had large-scale genocides in different parts of India, particularly, we are commemorating the centenary of the Mopla, carnage in Malabar, in Kerala, where in broad daylight, thousands of Nayars, men, women, and children were massacred. And we had communal riots across the country in Gulbarga, in Kohat, in Delhi, Panipat, Bengal, and so many places. And there was no intellectual response or a gathering of or consolidation of the Hindu society, which was so fractured into so many communities and castes and all of that. And that's where in jail in 1923, Savarkar came up with this treatise called Essentials of Hindutva, Who is a Hindu, where he defined a Hindu not by terms of religious terminologies or theological constructs, but as a cultural and a nationalistic identity marker, that anybody who lives between the Indus and the ocean, who considers this sacred geography as his or her Punya Bhumi, holy land, not again by religion, but by allegiance, that your allegiance and devotion is to this land and not to some Turkey or some extraterritorial, devotion. And also Pitrubhu, the land of your ancestors. So that person would be culturally and nationally a Hindu. He or she could follow any faith of their choice in their home, but their identity, as the world would see it, Hind and Hindustan and so on, the synonymity between Bharat and Hind and Indianness and Hindu was same. So that is how he coined this word. To your other question on the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, yes, he was never a part of it, though his elder brother Babarao Savarkar was among the founding fathers of the RSS along with Dr. Hedgewar. But then I think it was not as if there was a lot of rancor or ill will between the two. It was just that there were ideological differences. It's not a major rupture in relationship or whatever, but they had those differences of opinion within the larger saffron brotherhood, so to say.
And finally, Dr. Sampath, I want to focus on two other aspects. I want to come to Savarkar's views about the partition of India in 1947. Did Savarkar believe that the partition of India could have been averted? And what was the basis of his belief? And also, did he have a view on Jammu and Kashmir that India should not be balkanized? Also, the various theories about the Mahatma Gandhi's assassination, Savarkar being a stooge of the British rulers, and how he sought clemency during the time he spent in a cellular jail in the Andamans. Now, there is a view that Savarkar wrote the clemency petition at the instance of Mahatma Gandhi.
Yeah, completely. I think the Hindu Mahasabha was the only party which obstinately till the very end, May 1947 or so, opposed partition when it was a no-brainer that India was going to be divided. The subcontinent was being divided, largely because of what I mentioned earlier, this whole sacred geography. It was a sacred land. Someone could not just slice it into pieces and take limbs away from the larger national rubric. So he was all the time opposed to this idea. People erroneously say he was the one who propounded the two-nation theory and all that, which is a plain lie, because the two-nation theory initially came in the 1880s with Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, who said these are two Hindus and Muslims are two separate nations. And further, whether it was Sir Muhammad Iqbal or the various, separatist movements, the Morley-Minto reforms or the separate electorates and the communal award, all of this kind of were stepping stones to partition. What Savarkar had said is that, there are two nations in terms of civilizationally, there are two very different groups that are living together. But then, and as long as one group looks to allegiance to a larger ummah or a universal brotherhood, there would be these two nations. So all the time, pinning that patriotism and nationalism to a monogamous, love for your own nation and not having multiple partners. That was the crux of his nationalism. So as long as there is that, there would be two nations. But once that goes away, and there's emotional integration, he believed that both communities or all communities could live under a secular constitution of Hindu Rashtra, where nobody would be discriminated. The minorities need not even have a ghost of suspicion that their legitimate legal, religious, cultural rights would be infringed upon. No one gets extra privileges, even the Hindus or the minorities. Everybody is equal in the eyes of the law. There's no state religion for Hindu Rashtra. That's what he had envisaged. So secularism in the true sense of the word, but this is highly, manipulated and presented in a very distorted manner today. To the second part on the Gandhi murder and all of that, that's a long question. But it is important for your viewers to know that as recent as 2018, in answer to a public interest litigation, the Honorable Supreme Court of India, under Justice Bobde and Justice Nageshwar Rao, they gave out a very, very clear ruling on this, that the trial court's verdict is what holds. A commission of inquiry cannot overturn a trial court, and any kind of accusation that he was involved in Gandhi's murder is not held. And his honorable exoneration from the court in 1949 is what holds. So I think when the highest court, whom we all respect and revere, when they have given their verdict, I think there should be no second thoughts on that. Of course, petty politics, for the sake of that, these things can keep coming up. And on the clemency and apology and so on too, have made it very clear several times that this was a very tactical move. It was a very common practice for political prisoners of those days to file petitions. It was not a mercy petition. There's no apology anywhere. And in my own book, in the appendix, I have listed all the petitions. There are about 8 petitions, right from 1911 till 1924, where he's asking for his civil rights, and for not only him, but also other political prisoners, saying, clarify our position. Are we a common convict or are we a political prisoner? And according to that, give us whatever is our due. And in fact, in the 1917 petition, he says, if my name constitutes an obstacle in the release of all the other prisoners, you can omit my name and release the others, and that would give me as much joy as my own release would do, which also exemplifies that he was acting as a spokesperson for the other prisoners. And we had this recent statement of the defense minister, Mr. Rajnath Singh, that in 1920, even Mahatma Gandhi actually advised Savarkar's younger brother Narayan Rao to ask his 2 elder brothers to file a petition. So if it was such a bad thing to file a petition, then even Gandhiji would not have asked that, or he said, I will also intervene with the government and get him out, get your brothers out. So again, it's a straw man. It's resurrected now for petty politics. In those days, it was a very, very common practice for several prisoners, whether it was Barin Ghosh, Sachindranath Sanyal, or Savarkar, and later, for Ram Prasad Bismil and Ashfaqullah Khan, who were in the Kakori case, Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya filed a petition on their behalf. S.A. Dange of the CPI, he filed a petition. Pandit Nehru's father, Motilal Nehru, when 2 weeks his son was in Nabha jail, he kind of files a bond with the Viceroy, promising that his son will never enter Nabha again. So this whole practice of, giving those promises to the colonial government was something very commonplace. So, and Savarkar himself unashamedly or unabashedly talks about that in his autobiography in Marathi called Maji Janma Thep, and also in Echoes from the Andamans, which is a collection of letters he wrote to his younger brother. So it's not something that is new or a new discovery. Right. And if that was the image that is created of him, of a stooge, of a traitor, of an Islamophobe, of Gandhi's assassin, he would not have been feted in the manner that former Prime Minister Srimati Indira Gandhi did when Savarkar died in 1966, where she called him that he was cast in the classic mold of a revolutionary, that his life is a case of daring, bravery and patriotism, and that she also issued a stamp in his name, gave money for a memorial for him, and also got a film made by the INB ministry. So someone of the foresight and leadership of Srimati Gandhi would not have done that to someone who's maligned today in the names, ironically, by some of the same political parties. So I think this is all contemporary politics playing out, and for which history as well as historical figures like Savarkar become a casualty and are made to stand in the witness box time and again and constantly maligned.
All right, on that note, Dr. Sampath, thank you so much for making time for us here at DD India.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Wonderful talk.
And with that, it's a wrap, but news continues here on DD India. You can catch all the latest updates on our social media, mobile and digital platforms. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye. Decades after his death, Vinayak Damodar Savarkar evokes awe and anxiety in equal measure. Was he as reviled a figure